Hello and welcome to Module 1 of our Lesson Planning course. In this session, we'll explore why cognitive science matters in the classroom and how it can make your teaching more effective. Don't worry, although terms like cognitive load or schema sound technical, they're actually practical ideas you might already use. Cognitive science is basically the science of how we learn, and understanding a few key principles will help you plan lessons that stick with your students. In this video, we'll introduce 4 core principles from research, cognitive load theory, retrieval practice, dual coding, and schema theory, and see how they apply to everyday teaching. By the end, you'll see how these evidence-based strategies from experts like Sweller, Rodiger, and Karpika, Pivio, and Anderson can improve your lesson plans. Ready to dive in? Let's get started. First, cognitive load theory. Imagine trying to teach 5 new topics in one go. Your students would feel overwhelmed. Cognitive load theory, developed by John Sweller, explains why. It reminds us that our working memory can only hold a small amount of information at once. If we overload it, learning breaks down. We've all been in lessons where the teacher zoomed through complex material and we left more confused than when we started. That's cognitive load in action. Too much information, not enough time to process. For example, if I cram a slideshow with dense text and talk non-stop, my students' working memory gets overwhelmed and they struggle to remember anything. So how do we use this in lesson planning? Break information into bite-sized chunks. Present one idea at a time rather than everything at once. Pause to let students think or discuss before moving on. Also, cut out unnecessary details or fancy distractions that don't support learning. Sweller calls this reducing extraneous load. By streamlining content, you free up mental space for the important stuff. You can still tackle complex topics, but scaffold them. Teach foundational pieces first, then build up. In short, cognitive load theory reminds us to avoid overloading students' brains. When planning, ask yourself, am I giving information in manageable chunks? By respecting our brain's limits, you'll maximize learning and help students grasp and retain new material. Now let's move on to retrieval practice, our second principle. This is a fancy term for something simple: practicing remembering. Retrieval practice means regularly prompting students to recall information from memory rather than just rereading or passively listening. Why does this matter? Research by Henry Rodiger and Jeffrey Karpika showed that when students actively recall facts or concepts, like answering quiz questions, they remember that material much better in the long run. In other words, every time students pull knowledge out of their brains, those memory connections grow stronger. This is often called the testing effect, but it doesn't only mean big tests. It can be low-stakes activities too. For example, instead of simply reviewing notes on a history chapter, you might ask, without looking, write down 3 things you learned last lesson. That quick, no-pressure quiz is retrieval practice in action. Students might struggle for a moment, but that struggle is good for learning. How can you include this in your lesson plans? Try starting class with a 5-minute recap quiz or a brain dump where students list key points from yesterday. Or end a lesson with an exit question. What's one new concept you remember from today? You could even have students quiz each other with flashcards. The key is to make it routine and low stakes. Fun trivia games or quick polls work great. By planning these opportunities to retrieve knowledge, you help students retain information longer and understand it deeper. Plus, you get instant feedback on what stuck and what might need reteaching. So, retrieval practice is a win-win. It boosts memory and informs your teaching. Next up is dual coding, our third principle. This idea comes from Alan Pivio's research, and it's all about using words and visuals together. In plain terms, dual coding means presenting information in 2 formats at the same time, usually verbal and visual, to help it stick in students' minds. Why does this help? Our brains have one channel for dealing with language and another for dealing with images. If you engage both channels, you create 2 pathways to remember the concept. Think of it like having 2 hooks in your memory instead of 1. For example, if you're explaining a science process like the water cycle, you could say the steps and show a diagram of evaporation and rain. Students hear the explanation and see it illustrated simultaneously. The visual reinforces the verbal. Later, if they forget one part, the other can trigger their memory. In the classroom, dual coding can be simple. Use diagrams, sketches, infographics, or even gestures alongside your words. Instead of just describing a historical event, show a timeline with pictures of key figures while you talk about it. When introducing new vocabulary, display an image or symbol for each term as you explain it. Research suggests this approach helps students encode information more effectively into long-term memory because they have multiple ways to retrieve it later. Important tip: make sure your visuals are relevant and not too cluttered. A clear picture or icon that matches your point works best. An unrelated cute cartoon might actually add extraneous load. When lesson planning, ask yourself, could a picture, graphic organizer, or demonstration help clarify this point? Even a quick sketch on the board can do wonders. Dual coding is a great reminder that we learn through seeing and hearing, so combining those can double the impact. Our fourth and final principle is Schema Theory. This one is all about the power of prior knowledge. A schema, plural schemata, is basically a mental framework or a network of knowledge on a topic. Think of it as all the information and experiences you already have organized in your brain, your existing understanding of the world. Schema Theory says that when we learn something new, we attach it to what we already know. In fact, educational psychologist Richard Anderson noted that every act of comprehension involves one's knowledge of the world so far. In other words, new information makes sense only in light of connections to existing knowledge. If students have a relevant schema, they can absorb new content more easily. If they don't, they may struggle or misunderstand. For example, imagine you're introducing the concept of photosynthesis. If you start by activating a schema, say, asking what students know about how plants eat or grow, you're helping them retrieve their prior knowledge about plants. A student might recall, plants need sunlight and water. Great! That's a schema you can build on. Now, when you explain chlorophyll and conversion of sunlight to energy, they have a familiar hook to hang that new information on. If you didn't tap into any prior knowledge, those new terms would feel like abstract gibberish. For teachers, Schema Theory underscores the importance of connecting new material to prior learning. In lesson planning, this could mean beginning with a quick review of earlier related topics using analogies or examples from students' everyday life, or asking a warm-up question to recall relevant facts. Even showing a brief video or picture at the start can activate schema by reminding students of things they've experienced. By bridging old and new knowledge, you not only help students understand the material faster, but you also reduce cognitive load, since connected information chunks together as one bigger unit in memory. So, always consider, what background knowledge do my students already have, and how can I link today's lesson to it? When you plan with schema in mind, you're essentially teaching from the known to the new, which makes learning more meaningful and long-lasting. We've covered a lot of ground in a short time. Let's recap. Cognitive science gives us practical insights. Cognitive load theory reminds us not to overload students' working memory. Retrieval practice harnesses the power of recalling information. Dual coding combines words and visuals for greater effect. And schema theory highlights linking new learning to what students already know. These principles might feel abstract at first, but they truly come to life in day-to-day teaching. The next step is to apply them. So here's a little teacher challenge. Think about an upcoming lesson and pick one of these principles to infuse into your plan. Maybe you'll add a quick retrieval quiz at the start, or redesign a slide to include an image, dual coding, or chunk a difficult topic into 2 lessons, cognitive load, or begin with a connecting question to prior knowledge, schema. How will you use cognitive science in your classroom this week? Jot down one idea and give it a try. After the lesson, reflect. Did it help your students engage or understand better? Teaching is all about continuous improvement, and these strategies will get you closer to lessons that really stick. Feel free to share your reflections with colleagues or in our course forum. Finally, if you're hungry for more insights, check out the ebook Designing with the Brain in Mind, which we've linked in the video description for further reading. It dives deeper into the science behind learning and offers additional tips. Thank you for joining me in this exploration of cognitive science in the classroom. Remember, even small tweaks in your lesson planning can make a big difference in student learning. Happy teaching. Thanks for watching. Let's stay connected. You'll find all our latest updates, insights and resources on our social media channels. We look forward to engaging with you.